folks, and welcome to a special edition of our Freedom from the Press podcast, going over to the American Tribune Live today. And I am so excited to introduce to our audience, to you, the viewer, Royce White, an America First Senate candidate in Minnesota this past election cycle. This is the exact kind of candidate America needs to see run across the country if we're going to see real change. And Royce, welcome to the show. Before I pass it over to you, I just have to say, you are the people we need in the Senate, because we just watched Matt Gaetz turn down his nomination because there are too many neocons, too many rhinos, too many establishment hacks still in the Senate. And what happens in Minnesota, I was just telling you before the show, if we can change Minnesota, we can change it all. And I think Minnesota presents such a great microcosm of the stronghold of this neocon philosophy, this we don't want to ruffle any feathers philosophy. They can do anything they want on the other side, but we need to play by a certain set of rules, and we need to be nice to everybody, and it's just not working out anymore. But Royce, welcome to the show. Appreciate you being here today, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, no, I agree with the sentiment 100%. It is the literal definition of controlled opposition when your political opponents or any other type of adversary in any walk of life shows that they've abandoned all the rules, yet you still play by not just a certain set of rules, but a certain set of rules that show that they don't work, and they really don't have any shot of working on so many levels. You have fundamentally become the controlled opposition, and that's what we're suffering from in this party now. Some of these people play controlled opposition out of ignorance, and some of them play controlled opposition out of being in on it. Let's say, there's being ignorant, and then there's being in on it, and it's hard to know which ones are in on it or which ones are ignorant, because a lot of people can play ignorant as well. So we find ourselves in a precarious position where the number one thing we have to do is weed these people out, and that's why I love Donald Trump putting Gaetz up in the first place. If nothing else, it showed us what I've been saying about the Senate since the beginning, since I started to run, is it's not about beating Amy Klobuchar. The real issue is there aren't 10 America First senators across the entire United States Senate on either side of the aisle, and they just showed us their hand in spades in that regard. So yeah, we have that problem on the national level, the local level, the state level, and even the international level, as we see in these last couple of days. So we got a huge hill to climb.
Absolutely. I made the comment yesterday. Let me know if you agree or not. Right now, I'm very optimistic. I'm optimistic for the next 12 years. The media is collapsing. Corporate media is collapsing. What voters showed to the Democrat Party and Kamala Harris is we're not playing these games anymore. We're fed up with the lies. We see through it. So I'm really optimistic. Donald Trump's got 4 years. If it's Vance that picks up the torch or somebody else, I think we're going in the right direction. It is not Democrats that are the opposition right now. It's the neocons. If we can, I'm not worried about the Democrats at this point. I'm worried about neocons, rhinos, the establishment Republicans. They're the ones hanging on to their power. I played clips of Tulsi Gabbard getting just libeled and slandered by Nikki Haley as she called her a Putin asset, spouting the Russian propaganda. You've got all these former Republicans that are Republican in name only going on about how Trump is a threat. These are the people we need to go after. You've got the Minnesota GOP that you know better than anybody, and we'll get into that in a little bit. We do not want to see America First represented in the House and the Senate, at the federal level, like you mentioned, at the state level here. It is the neocons that we need to go after and remove. They need to be taken out of the equation, because Democrats are not the threat right now to Donald Trump making America great again. It is the rhinos in the Senate. It is the rhinos in the House. It is the rhinos that you went up against in your Senate campaign.
Yeah, no, I agree. I wouldn't even say that we don't have to. Well, here, I'll go back to what you said in the beginning there. Corporate media is breaking down. The trouble is the people who run or who understand content, who understand where content is headed, are already regrouping. They're already reorganizing, and they're going to, and you've already seen they've commissioned a bunch of content creators, sort of these digital social media influencers that are going to occupy those platforms as well in grand fashion, in a fashion in which you can still pay to play, right? Anywhere where you can pay to play for information, you're going to have the same sort of monopolistic establishment propaganda reemerge. And I'm optimistic about the foothold we have because Donald Trump won, but I'm not comfortable at all with the place that we're at, or even the direction
Right.
we're headed. I think in some regards, and I say this obviously, in full support of Donald Trump and the movement and what we accomplished, because it's historic by all measures. In fact, it can't even be put into words what we overcame just in winning this 2024 election. However, sometimes an enemy can be so smart as to uh, grant you the illusion of a decisive and clear victory when they already have the next stage or phase planned. Actually, that's the story of Troy and Sparta, right? The Spartans, the Greeks gave the Trojans the illusion of victory, and they even gave them a little, a little present, a little gift to celebrate that victory. And lo and behold, that was the actual thing that would be their undoing, which is a profound story to say the least. But I think it has great correlation to where we are today, and I say that because Donald Trump is an interesting character. Interesting in that in his heart, he wants peace, and that makes him just the right person we need right now. But also his desire to have peace will open the door, will continue to leave a door open for the establishment to come forward, mea culpa, sort of say, hey, we were wrong, you were right, you were the guy, you won, you proved that we all didn't have a good pulse on the American people and the electorate, and we want to try and unify. And in that unity, that false sense of unity, they will play the games that they've just showed they played with Matt Gaetz, and it's going to continue to happen. And it's a slippery slope, because in one sense, the American people as a whole have been so gum dipped politically, philosophically, culturally, that Donald Trump can't get too aggressive in his position without losing the American public. And that does have ramifications, right? Especially in war, when you're in a war footing, and we are on a war footing now. Three fronts of in Asia, 3 fronts in Asia, we're on a war footing. But so you do have to sort of keep the American people and the American public, not only in the terms of, at the highest level, the morale of the people you may need to call upon to fight a war, a full-blown kinetic war, but also for the future of the party. I mean, let's talk about that, the future of the party and the movement. The future and the party of the movement sort of rest upon how Donald Trump handles this next 4 years. He could easily break the movement or set it back, and it may not be him. It may be people who he brings on, and decisions that he has to, let's say, give to someone else, and they make a huge blunder. We got to thread a needle right now. So my point in saying that is, number one, the Democrats and the rhinos and neocons are all one group of people. Like, no separation between them. They just hang out in different places, but they all protect the same exact interests. And I think right now the Democrats, and again, I want to say I don't think that this victory showed that the American people are headed in the right direction in any grand fashion. I mean, we won along the margins, and I think there was enough people on the margins who see the bullshit, who are saying, hey, wait a second, this mainstream media propaganda is getting so obnoxious and felonious. I'm just rejecting it on face value. But I don't quite necessarily think that those people, even on the margins, necessarily understand exactly why they should be rejecting the establishment fundamentally. And that is going to be a crisis, or that is the crisis of tomorrow. It's not about whether they were let's say disaffected enough to say, you know what, I'm voting for Donald Trump because I don't believe any of you people. Okay, but why specifically? And if we don't pin down and teach the American people specifically why they should reject the establishment, then we're bound to face another cohort of puppet politicians and candidates who are bought off on all sides, and they will defend the exact same interest that Donald Trump is threatening now.
You make a great point. Yeah, and it reminds me, Donald Trump, I think he just got over 50% of the popular vote. So by no means a landslide, a referendum for the next 4 years. But you make a great point, and I want to repeat it to make sure I understand it correctly. We voted against Kamala Harris because we didn't want those policies, but you're saying at the fundamental level, do they necessarily align with what America First is about, where we actually do want peace? We actually want to stop the illegal invasion at our borders. Or are they just turned off by some narratives that they hear? Okay, I didn't like the direction it was going. I don't know why I didn't like the direction it was headed, but we'll give Donald Trump a chance. Did I get that correctly?
Right. I mean, yeah. I mean, do they actually understand the issues at a fundamental level? My sense of things is, no. You know, and I guess my race is such a great example of that, or maybe Minnesota's political landscape demographic is unique for whatever set of reasons. There could be a bunch of them, but I think my race shows a good example where there was a there was a there was a set there was a sort of thread of Republican voters that voted for Donald Trump but didn't vote for me, at least on paper. Now, again, the integrity of our elections should always be in question first and foremost, because we have problems with election integrity, not only in the country but here in America. So hopefully we'll clean some of that up. And I think it's completely possible and even plausible that in the shadow of Donald Trump's momentum nationally, let's say publicity wise, that the Democrats in the machine knew that they would have to concede Donald Trump was going to win the presidency, but still try and undermine the Senate and the House. And you see they're still counting votes in the House there in California, and we're now like 14 days out after the election. So
we finally just got a conclusion in Pennsylvania. Do you mind if I cut you off? Because Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, all Minnesota, New York example, Trump didn't win Minnesota, but the margins, how do you vote for Donald Trump? I'm of the same mindset. We can't cheat again like we did in 2020. I don't think anyone that is being honest is going to look at 2020 and say that was just an honest election where we had 20 million more voters for Joe Biden than turned out for Kamala Harris. Can't cheat again for president, but we can pump the brakes on his control if we allow all of these Senate seats and otherwise red states to still go towards the Democrat candidate. And your vote disparity, Trump's votes in Minnesota and then the Royce White votes, I mean, that is a huge gap.
Well, yeah, but and look, some of it was probably cooked. Some of it is that there is a Donald Trump supporter out there that may like Donald Trump because of his individual personality, his individual journeys, you know, his individual cachet and celebrity, and may not agree with the things that I'm willing to say. And there is a place in there where Donald Trump and I have a very different tone on some things. And again, Donald Trump is a peacemaker. I'm a door kicker, and there's a difference in that. And where Donald and I'm just going to speak frankly, you know, where Donald Trump has been willing to make peace and cut deals is exactly where the Rhino establishment has snuck in right alongside of him and stuck a knife in him. And he survived a great deal of stab wounds, and we can only hope that he's learned from those mistakes, and now he's gonna reconstruct his administration and the people around him in a way that really reflects the platform and the message, and you know, his sort of divine appointment, you could say. But look at, Chris Christie, for example. Chris Christie's probably the best example. It doesn't get any bigger, literally and figuratively, than Chris Christie being a part of the 2016 campaign team and then going on a full-blown Trump is the worst thing in American history tour during the 2024 campaign cycle. That he is the literal and figurative biggest example of the snakes and vipers that are out there in the garden right now. But there's other people as well. Look at John Thune. You know, Chris Christie's kind of the obnoxious sort of caricature of the never Trump turncoat, but John Thune is the real dangerous one, right? Chris Christie, we can all see, right? He became so obnoxious. Nobody in their right mind really thinks Chris Christie has any credibility, except for the Democrats who will believe anybody who opposes Trump or the America First movement. But as far as that middle of the road sort of person, we see who Chris Christie is, but John Thune we do not see. I think a lot of people do not recognize. You know, for example, I'll go back to my race and the difference between me and Trump. I think Donald Trump actually believes that he can save the post-World War II democratic liberal order. I think that it's a complete scam, root and branch. I think it was a scam to begin with. I think the fundamental is off. I think the motivation was off. And so I think the post-World War II democrat liberal order needs to go. I think the international rules-based order needs to go. I don't think the set of agreements that the international rules-based order was based on are actually agreements that can be sustained. I mean, we're seeing that now. That this, at a point, that's not even really a conspiracy theory or even a theory. It's almost a fact. I mean, the international rules-based order has broken down, and we're already renegotiating it, but we want to renegotiate it under the same name. Well, under the same name, it carries the same history. And so you can't come to a new agreement under the same name with the same people from the same institutions and think you're going to get a different result. I think Donald Trump believes that he can save that globalist framework, but just change it to an American-led globalist framework. I would have to disagree with him on that and caution him to think long and hard about that. So I want to say, I don't think that your average American citizen, especially here in Minnesota, that may have voted for Trump but wouldn't vote for me, really understands what I'm even talking about. I mean, honestly, and I don't say that to be demeaning or try and be disrespectful to anybody or kind of undermine their intelligence. Actually, I hate when politicians and all of these experts and pundits, sort of talk highbrow and say, "Oh, the average American doesn't know enough." No, I want them to know. But we have created a culture where when people like me start to talk about the technicalities and fundamentals of our policy, especially foreign policy, people kind of got the tendency to kind of disengage from it. I mean, that is kind of the hallmark of this era in American politics, and it is the safety valve for the establishment, for the communists, for the globalists, for all these people who oppose American citizenship. That's their safety net. Their safety net is, we can, in order to get the conversation to a place that it needs to go, we've conditioned all of these average American citizens to sort of be turned off by that. So again, when I said in my race that the bad guys won World War II, or that, quote unquote, there were no good guys, as the electorate here in Minnesota, at least some portion of it, we didn't have the spiritual or political awareness to understand just how true that is. Not even that it wasn't offensive. It shouldn't have been offensive, but just how true it is. I mean, first off, we were allied with a totalitarian communist regime during World War II that genocided at least 10 to 20 million Christians in Russia. So number one, we were already allied with people who were definitively not good people. They were not good guys by any measure.
And what they did in Germany after the war that nobody knows about, they continue to that slaughter. Absolutely.
Yeah, not only that, but then after the war, we decided that the Nazis were necessary enough to incorporate them into our academic universities and into our scientific programs, our military and scientific programs with paperclip and a bunch of other programs as well. So we got involved with the Nazis. So we fought a world war between the Allied forces, the Axis forces. Our allies were communists, genocidal maniacs. And then the people that we absorbed, that we fought against, they were genocidal maniacs. So how do we think we're the good guys? And even furthermore, when you fight a world war, when people come to war on a worldwide scale, I'm hard pressed to believe that anybody leaves from that war without having given a piece of themselves spiritually. And we kind of have this self-centered, self-absorbed, here and now narcissism where we think that our side of the football is always right. Well, you could be right intellectually, you could even be right morally or ethically, but once you go to exchanging blows, that becomes a very slippery slope in the spiritual consideration. So I think spiritually, when 76 million people are killed in 6 years, what it shows most is a lack of temperance, a lack of man's temperance, which is a very important Christian value and belief. So again, when I said that there were no good guys or that the bad guys won, well, after the war, we saw the rise of a military industrial complex that still exists today. And it didn't stop any wars. It stopped It stopped world wars, but it didn't stop war. And in fact, the wars became more corrupt than ever. And I mean, what am I supposed to say about that other than there were no good guys here? Okay. We just tell ourselves a story in the West about World War II, and it's the anchor upon which all other foreign policy stands or sits. And people are not willing to even touch that. They're not willing to talk about it. I mean, we have such a profound legacy and sort of fealty and affinity for World War II. You can't even broach the topic. Well, fine. I mean, if that's the way people want to play it, if there's some boomer demographic here in Minnesota that thinks, hey, we'll vote for Donald Trump, but we're not voting for Royce, we'd rather vote for Amy Klobuchar, I'm very skeptical about the future of this country and this movement.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned a demographic moment there as well at the end, the boomer mindset. Royce, what's your take? Do you have data on the breakdown of who voted for you in terms of, I think Gen Z is over it. It seems like Gen Z males, at least you look in the polls, leaning more heavily conservative or opening their eyes to just the lies and the hatred displayed towards them by the government, by the media. Do you see a possible shift in that piece?
I mean, you'd be hard pressed to get me to believe any data set about demographic of the votes. I mean, I feel the same way about it as I felt about polling, about exit polling. I just don't trust that it gives us a good look at partly because I can't even believe the votes, let alone the polls. So, I mean, it's just one of those things where I don't get into it. Only thing I can discuss is sort of personal experience, sort of anecdotal. And when I'm having conversations with people with, across those generations. And, it varies. It varies. But again, I think I can't even blame the boomer generation. I mean, or the Gen Z, I can't even blame them because I know how they teach World War II.
Mm-hmm.
I know how they teach. I know how they've taught and propagandized American citizens, for generations. So it's not even like I'm angry with them, but I am going to stand up for the truth, whether I be 32 and you be 70 or not. And you're not going to get me off the scent or move me off the spot or the position by saying, hey, I'm older than you, show me some respect. No, no, we're going to tell the truth. If you have a problem with it, then by all means discuss it. Tell me how. Tell me what the details are. Tell me the facts. It's like when I was talking to Dustin Gragey, he goes into this esoteric explanation where, how history works. It doesn't start and stop subjectively. And this war with Russia didn't begin when we put weapons in Ukraine. It was happening 100 years before that as well. And then I go to press him back on the matter and say, well, yeah, let's talk about the 100 years before that then. Let's go all the way back to the way back. Let's talk about 100 years ago. And he didn't want to do that either. I mean, so part of it is an obfuscation of history and detail, because the detail only further indicts their motive. And in all in all, Dustin Gragey, and I think he's a prime example of the most dangerous in the Republican Party, or let's say in the conservative movement. And I use air quotes for a specific reason, because I think the conservative movement is a fugazi. I mean, I just think, conservatism in and of itself has the right principle, the right fundamental, but a bunch of corrupt, dishonest actors. And either they're on the Christian right and they take the Lord's name in vain, or they're on the political side and they wrap themselves in the flag. And it's just, it's both are dishonest. And Dustin Gragey shows it. He's got the effeminate voice, and I got the picture of me and my family on my ex profile picture, and I say before I agree to a debate, I have to run it by my wife to see if her routine will be disturbed or not, and then all of a sudden it's these candidates are bad for these reasons, or Ron DeSantis has the most conservative record, one of the most conservative records there in DC, and at the end of the day, all that's well and good, fine. But at the end of the day, when we touch on certain specific issues, Ron DeSantis showed who he was. When he called Putin a war criminal, he shows that he has a lack of American fundamental beliefs and values. A fundamental belief and value of American citizenship is I have a right to life. Part of me having a right to life and liberty, freedom, part of me having that right to life, to liberty, to freedom, to property, to the pursuit of happiness. Of course, I have a right to defend my own life. And I have a right to defend my own life well before you start to harm me. I have a right to defend my own life when there's a credible perceived threat. And by that standard, anywhere where we wanted to bring the Democrat liberal order, anywhere where we said we were bringing freedom and democracy by peace through strength, also deserves to observe those rights.
Makes sense.
And so Russia has every right to say, hey, your missiles are getting a little too close and they're pointed at us. We don't have to wait for you to fire for us to shoot. I mean, that's just, if you don't understand that, I don't care how you vote. I don't care who you voted for. I don't care what political group you're a part of. You have a crisis of American fundamental beliefs and values. And that's what we need to sort out. It's like I've been saying to the conservative movement ever since I started being on Jason Whitlock's show. And he didn't understand this either, because he and his audience have a very, let's say, evangelical or Christian, Protestant Christian sort of following. They didn't understand when I said, if you trade your freedom for security, you will have neither and you deserve neither. And the best example of that is that, this obsession with policing is it's ridiculous. No, the first, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't support the police. I'm not saying, I think we should overhaul police funding. I think we should overhaul the funding. I think we should train them better. I think there should be mandatory training. I think there should be time and a half for extra training. I think the police should get a tax break for how much we make them put up with. I don't even think police should have to pay taxes. We've put the police in such a bad position in this country culturally. The decay is so bad. They should get that should be their tax break. I mean, you got these 501c3 nonprofits saying that they're bringing mosquito nets to Western Africa or to the Eastern Africa, and they're getting a tax break, and only 5% of the money's actually getting to where it says. Yet the police have to answer, calls where a mom's cut her child's head off and put it in the freezer. I mean, these people should have a tax break. No taxes for the police, okay? Yet somehow the police endorsed Amy Klobuchar, the police union. But my point is, I'm not saying anything about the police. What I'm saying is, when American citizens don't realize that the Second Amendment was put in place so that they were their own first line of defense, another crisis of American fundamental values and beliefs. And on the conservative side, conservatives can say what they want. They can talk about the rule of law or law and order or whatever it is that floats their boat. You and I both know, and if they're honest out there, they know the reason they want a proliferated police state is so that first line of defense responsibility doesn't lay in their own hands. And that is the truth. And they're a bunch of boomer, and I hate to say it, and it's not a racial thing, but the demographics of our country are the demographics of our country. There are a bunch of white Republican boomers that love the radical materialism and corporatism and the sort of crony capitalism and all the other globalist free market, free trade BS that's been sold by the very machine that undermined this country. They love it. They love it. They're bought into it. They just have a different political view, right? I mean, it's kind of just like this. It's a LARP. It's a cosplay. It's like, yeah, but I don't agree with the taxation and the regulation. It's like, come on. Okay. You don't want to have to go and buy a gun and learn how to use a gun. And when some young black man comes up to you as you leave the bank in one of these metropolitan suburbs and the two paths seem to cross, you don't want to have to be the one who pulls that gun and takes that life and deal with the spiritual ramifications and the maybe the legal ramifications of having to do that. And that is an abnegation of American citizenship. And when we don't understand that, all we do is lay the predicate for a military industrial complex. And I've been saying it for a long time. The police have become the lowest rung of the military industrial complex, and not by their own devices, not by their own doing. It is a byproduct of American citizens feeling towards their own citizenship and what we've put on the police and what we refuse to carry ourselves. And there is a group of American citizens out there, demographic, across the aisle, across racial lines, across socioeconomic groups, that does not want to have to deal with that. And until we reteach the Russians, they understand this. And I'm talking about the Russian people. You know, that's why Putin can say with confidence yesterday, any Western leader, any person there in the United States who thinks that Russia will suffer a strategic defeat is fooling themselves. The reason he can say that is because in Russia, the Russian people have a sort of an integrated cultural sense of what it means to be Russian and what they're willing to do and sacrifice in order to preserve that culture and that identity. Absolutely. Now, you can call that identity, identitarianism or ethno-nationalism or bigotry or racial superiority. You can call it whatever you want to call it. The question is, how do we handle it? How do we deal with it? Because here in America, we have a crisis in that area.
100%. I mean, we are tribal by nature. You can't break away hundreds of thousands of years of human development. We have to be tribal, and it is fine that the Russian people feel that way. There's so much to break down there. I did want to pop a comment from you. This is from MAGA Deplorable over on X. I agree with him. Tax breaks, whatever they can get. I come from a family of policemen, and they're certainly not doing it for the money. Yeah, 100%. I think that's a great idea, and there's so much to get into with that. Royce, I want to back up a little bit. And can we talk about your foray into politics? I think this is a fascinating story as well, especially for our audience. And again, to expand this, extrapolate it, I want to believe that there's hundreds of Royce Whites out there that are passionate about telling the truth, passionate about helping people wake up. And I know you made the point that we're not disparaging folks, and I'm the same way. I think people are wrong. I think they're misinformed. And largely, yes, you have free will. You're able to think through processes. But by the time you start kindergarten and then you grow up in this media environment, you've been brainwashed and propagandized. At a certain point, like, that is your worldview. And it is threatening to think, if I let one domino fall, if I admit this one Trump hoax was a complete lie, or I accept that this one belief that I've clung onto is wrong, philosophically, that can cause a lot of harm to an individual, because now they have to reevaluate everything they believe. So you're playing psychological defense in an extent. So I agree. And I was there. I'm not better than them for looking at things differently now, but history major, I taught in the government school system, administrated in the government school system. I believed that for a long time. I operated in that worldview. Started doing some other reading, other listening, finding folks like you, and you realize kind of the scam, and you pull the wool off from over your eyes. And I think that we can get other people there as well. And it's just going to be truth tellers like you making it happen. And I mean, my complaint, I'm going to go on a little Minnesota politics rant for a second, then I'll turn it over to you to talk about kind of your freedom of politics and where you're headed from this last Senate run. But we have that misnomer of Minnesota nice up here, and I think it's largely just Minnesota naive, and Minnesota voters and all these neocon voters out there that were supporting Nikki Haley in the primary. With everything we're going through, I'm going to support Nikki Haley in the primary system against Donald Trump. They just want to pretend that their politicians are nice. You know, they believe the lies that Donald Trump's a corrupt businessman, ignoring the fact that all politicians are corrupt. They want to pretend that because this person didn't say a mean thing, that they're not mean behind the scenes, or they're not mean towards you in their policies. They ignore everything that the policies do to them. But as long as that person sounds nice when they're campaigning, I'll go vote for them. But tell us about how you got started. Correct me if I'm wrong, you started in 2022. You were trying to unseat Ilhan Omar in District 5. Was that your first political run?
Yes, it was.
And what motivated that? What got you into politics?
Well, it was a number of things. It started back when I was 21 years old, and the mental health conversation that I was a part of as a public in the public square. There's a conversation that was sort of new. It was sort of taboo. People weren't talking about it. People were just starting to ask certain questions in mainstream media outlets about mental health. How do we see mental health? Where are we on the topic of mental health as America? As the general public. And I was a lightning rod in that conversation because I had a huge political policy dispute with the NBA around their collective bargaining agreement, and that was the first time that I was really exposed to just how corrupt the mainstream media was personally, like where I was personally involved. And the way that the mainstream media came to the defense of the NBA was to say, hey, Royce White is just afraid to fly, and that's why his career is going to eventually fizzle out, and he just can't He just can't handle the physical requirements of being an NBA player. When that wasn't the truth at all. The NBA had a huge gaping hole in terms of their mental health policy. And I'm not talking about transgender woke mental health policy. I'm talking about fundamental ones and twos, blocking and tackling in terms of does insurance and does your banned substance list clearly define where is the mental health and the physical health, where is the line blurry, and how do we all interpret it, and how do we all have a common set of baseline understanding and expectations, so the players and the coaches and the referees and the agents and the players union and the NBA office and the attorneys can all be organized and talk about things from the same information, right? I mean, it was like Western in there. When I got there, nobody was talking. Everybody kind of had this unspoken gun, this kind of figurative gun pointed at each other, just waiting for this bomb to go off. And then there was going to be some big, dispute or arbitration. And they were willing to leave it like that. The NBA's position was basically, hey, mental health is such an anomaly in general. Mental health conditions, mental health issues for players is such an anomaly. It's so rare. We'll leave it to the off chance one of these things actually becomes a problem. We'll take it to arbitration, and we'll let the arbitration set the precedent. Well, if you're a player, you're going to get screwed by that process. That's just, so as a player, I was like, well, for example, I'm prescribed Xanax, doctor prescribed, legal for me to take. However, Xanax was on the NBA's banned substance list. And when I went to them and said, hey, well, this drug I'm prescribed for, their response was, well, you can take it because you're prescribed. This is talking about people who use it in an illicit fashion, right? They use it, they acquire it on the street, and they're using it recreationally. And my response back to them was, well, okay, but the ramifications of taking the drug, whether you get it illegally or legally, end up being the same. The ramifications end up being that you are very likely to become addicted, and that addiction will have physical consequences.
Mm-hmm.
And when even at that point, when I said that, people were looking at me like I had three eyes, and I'm like, well, yeah, this is what happens when you let bread and circuses run your country, run your society. You have a bunch of people who know how to keep the entertainment good, how to keep the product good, but they haven't really taken a strong consideration of the schematics underneath how everything works. Thus, you get cultural decay. Mm-hmm. So I was asking those things, and what I was really pointing out is that, number one, that this entire global corporate community works in this way, and the NBA becomes the sort of fixation of culture, of people and culture, to distract them from looking at how things really work. So I was pointing that out, but I was also saying, you guys actually think that because you ignore mental health, that it isn't having an impact on your players, and even more importantly, your own pocket? You think that these players that are, addicted to drugs and video games and sex and gambling and all these other problems because they're coping with whatever stresses and unresolved trauma or whatever it is they're dealing with it from their life and their childhood, you think that doesn't affect the game? I mean, what kind of scam are you telling yourself? What you're really saying is, even if it does affect the game, if we ignore it, then the fans can ignore it and the game can go on as it's supposed to. Okay, that's fine. But then don't tell me that when you write Black Lives Matter on the court, that you really have some profound, grander, love and care and desire to help the broader scope of humanity. Fuck you. No, you don't. And that's fine. But we can't play it every way, because when we play it every way, me as a rational is, I just can't make heads or tails of things anymore. I'm kind of, I'm kind of coming and going. I don't like that. That makes me anxious. All right. Yep. That doesn't feel good when you're in a room full of people and everybody knows there's this elephant. They don't want to address it. And they're willing to act. And not only that, but they're willing to just walk around the room and walk around the elephant and act like it's not there. I mean, they're bumping into it. Ding. You got one player who gets caught for using cocaine. And it's like, well, yeah, he's just a bad apple. Really? I don't think so. I think there's a cocaine problem in the entire country. Right. And so I use that example because that was kind of my initiation into the public square and talking about policy and corporations and all of these things. And I was blackballed. I mean, The mainstream media came to the defense of the NBA in a way that still shows today, where there are casual fans who just became fans of the NBA in recent years. They really don't know the history of the league. You know, that the game has gotten big and very skilled and much more widespread. And so there are new fans, and they see my name involved in politics and they go, that's the guy who was afraid to fly. No, I was the guy who said that there was a lack of mental health policy. And then I wrote the policy, and then they implemented the policy, and then they blackballed me from the league because they couldn't come to grips with the fact that I had to beat on them when it comes to a policy. And so that was kind of the, my 20s. And then later on, right around 29 here in 2020, age 29, right here in 2020, the George Floyd thing broke out here in Minnesota. And I was like, oh, really? Oh, so this is the culmination. This is the culmination of a global corporate community that wants everybody to believe they care about the well-being and prosperity of the people. Really? This is how we're going to, this is the sort of climactic event, huh? Not a chance. Not a chance. Let's see who wants to talk about the Federal Reserve and fractional reserve banking. Zip. The whole establishment went quiet, and it was on both sides of the aisle. Oh, yeah. I mean, as soon as I marched people to the Federal Reserve in 2020, after George Floyd died, I became persona non grata. I mean, you could just feel it. And it was more so the Democrats than anything, because the Democrats were more aligned with me in talking about mental health, although they were doing it in a sneaky and self-serving sort of woke, precursor to transgenderism way. And that is why they were doing it. And that's why they hold me in such contempt now, is because they thought in their head, because I was talking about mental health as a sort of baseline issue, the human condition, they thought that I was all in on the woke transgenderism use of mental health. Absolutely not. Right. So, but they went dark first. They were like, nah. It was the Washington Post. They said, oh, rising young activist stands up tall in Minneapolis' time of need to lead people. And they never once mentioned the Federal Reserve. They never once came back to follow up and ask me, why did you bring people to the Federal Reserve instead of the police precinct? And then the conservative media, because I was associated with, quote unquote, associated with Black Lives Matter protests, the conservative media didn't want to ask the question about the Fed. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't be until later that I would realize that the conservative media doesn't want to talk about the Fed either, regardless of Black Lives Matter. Right? I mean, so that was kind of the jumping off point of politics for me. And then right in 2022, I mean, I started running a race about 9 months out from the 2022 midterm. So it was all kind of in that same 24-month period from 2020 and George Floyd up until the 2022 midterm election.
That's fascinating. The comment on Black Lives Matter could not be more accurate. Yeah, and we could spend another hour talking about the Fed and your thoughts on that. And I don't know. Donald Trump talked about getting rid of the income tax. We will see. We will see about that and abolishing the Fed. So you run for the House in 2022. It's a large Democrat district. Did you feel like that was a run to get your voice out there? Just wake people up, spread the message? Was there a chance to win that race, did you think? Like, we have to expose Omar, we've got to expose the Democrats. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot saying, I'm not saying you're running a losing campaign. I'm just kind of curious, like, what's the thought process when you're running? Just kind of curious your thought process.
Yeah. No, I get the question. The thing people have to understand about elections and campaigns are the result will be the will of the people if your elections are fair and equal, right? I mean, that's kind of the huge if. I mean, right now that's the huge if. Are the elections fair? Number one. But if they are fair and equal, then the results will be the will of the people. And the will of the people, even if decided in majority, doesn't always necessarily mean that it's right. And that also applies to smaller subsects of the country and smaller jurisdictions and smaller down ballot, more local races, whether it be, a statewide race all the way down to a congressional district race, maybe a state senate or state house race. I mean, all of these individual locales have an individual will of the people that may or may not be right, right or wrong. So in Congressional District 5, what you have is Hennepin County that has been overwhelmingly Democrat voting for a long time. Really, it's the main reason why Republicans don't win the entire statewide elections, or the you know, in Minnesota, is because of Hennepin County. If it weren't for Hennepin County, Republicans would always win here in Minnesota. So we don't really have a Democrat or a deep blue state. We have a very red state with one deep blue county.
The map is fascinating to look at. Yeah, pocket of blue in Hennepin, pocket of blue in Ramsey, red.
yeah. Well, you got to come. I mean, up there in the Iron Range, and you got down there in Rochester area, a couple other big metropolitan areas, a couple counties that go blue. But the point is that, you know, Congressional District 5 is the beating heart of the Democrat stronghold, right? Right there in that sort of Minneapolis, greater Minneapolis area. And Ilhan Omar, you know, she's a powerhouse, not just because she has that far left leaning progressive sort of radical leftist grassroots energy and momentum and support behind her, also because the Republicans love her. They love her being in office because they can raise money off of her.
They love to hate her. Yep.
They love to hate her, and they make a caricature out of her, and everybody, you know, gets caught, you know, circling the Ilhan Omar wagon. And my thing was, let me draw her out. I want to actually debate the issues with her. I want to go into Hennepin County, and I want to, you know, a lot of what campaigns become are rangefinders, especially when you have areas that have been held or controlled by a certain party for so long. You need to go in there and figure out what's going on here. Like, what do people actually think? What is the worldview here? What are the opinions, and what are the set of facts that make up this, you know, this political ethos here in this area? And so when I got into the CD5 race on the Republican side, what I realized right away was the Republican presence, I mean, at a party level in Hennepin County, in Minneapolis, was all but non-existent. In the primary in Hennepin County, I mean, the primary in Congressional District 5 in my race, because I ran a primary, in the primary, only 10,000 Republicans even voted in the entire primary. 10,000 people. So, I mean, it says a couple things, and I'll get to that in a moment, but in the Republican Congressional District Convention, where we endorsed a Republican candidate, there were 200, I think there were about 200 or so people in our Congressional District Convention, delegates, right? And the room was split about 48-52, 47-53 or something like that, like 114 to 137 votes. And my opponent at the time, Cicely Davis, she won the primary. Now, she had all the establishment fixings, right, to come in. That she had the former chair of the congressional district, Mark Miller, you know, who's a devout Zionist, and I'm sure believed that Royce is an anti-Semite. Her campaign manager was running around telling people I was an anti-Semite. She had the support of the same financial backers of Nikki Haley. I mean, the exact same people as Nikki Haley. Okay, and so yeah, she was able to pluck another 20 votes in the middle there, you know, or on the fence to get the endorsement. But the telling sign from that convention was I stood up and asked the entire room, "Are we the party of God?" You can go and watch that congressional district speech from 2020 on my Instagram page, and the room went nuts. I mean, there was a real division in the room. I mean, there was pandemonium. I remember there was one woman on the far left side of the room who yelled, "You don't have a corner on God." And there was a young gentleman in the middle of the room who said, "Yes, we do." And so I had walked into a sort of tension around the issue of God and religion and faith that would become in great part the springboard to how Donald Trump has progressed along the MAGA movement in the country for the 2024 race that he just won. But then we were in a very different place, right? Then the party was very different. So I was range finding the Republican Party first, and then I realized, and I ended up losing the primary by about 700, 800 votes, right? And then I was told, well, you should run for a smaller office. You know, maybe you should run in the state or House or the state Senate or maybe city council or something like that. And I said, wait a second, we need a much bigger sample size. I want to know where the entire Minnesota Republican Party is. Let's get to a Minnesota Republican Party convention. and I ran a U.S. Senate race. We got to a convention there, and earlier in May of this year, and the stark difference, obviously, and not only different from my 2022 campaign in that convention, but just the tone and the energy of the whole country was different, right?
Yep.
And so I won in overwhelming fashion in our state convention and got that endorsement, 68% on the first ballot. And even then, I'm not satisfied. Everybody's going, wow, nobody wins these things on the first ballot. What an amazing accomplishment. I'm going, 32% of people voted for this neocon rhino, Joe Frazier. Right. And this is what I'm saying. So when you ask me about the thought process going into these campaigns is more of range finding, because we've all been so gum dipped for generations in communist liberal ideology. I'm not thinking, wow, Donald Trump won the popular vote by 5 million votes. We're going in the right direction. My thought is, who in the world is still voting for Kamala Harris and Dick Cheney? So I'm always thinking about it from that lens, and I think that's an important process for us as candidates and as American citizens.
Absolutely. I actually sent out a tweet. There was a poll that said 54% support of Donald Trump now, or watching his approvals go up, and I responded to the tweet 46%. That means 46% still don't. How do you change their minds? So what is your message? You're obviously just going to stick to your guns. You're going to tell the truth. You're going to say it like it is.
Yep.
How do we break through? Is it just repetition? How do you get through the Dustin Grages and others that you mentioned, Max Miller, others that are spearheading this neocon movement, and just these regular, and I'll just say Minnesotans, since we're both in Minnesota here, talking about your foray into Minnesota politics.
Yeah.
What does it take to wake them up? How do you get them to see through the facade? Like, this isn't about being nice. It's not about voting for the nice person. How do you get them to actually look at the core issues, what you call the fundamental, and just say, look, your government is corrupt. The Fed is corrupt. These overseas interventions are getting people killed needlessly. They're playing you on both sides. And I want to add some commentary on you as well. This is what I wanted to talk about when you brought up Black Lives Matter, and then you bring it up again with your race against Ilhan Omar, how we love to hate her. You are so refreshing, and I think what is so refreshing about Us America First is it's not just some partisan one side or the other. We're cutting through the party lines, the BS, and you're just saying, look, this is what's good for Americans, and this is what's not good for Americans. I'm over it. You're over it. How do we get other Americans to realize, like, Democrat, Republican, not really the issue here? It's either the elites and then everybody else, and America First represents us right now, this populist movement.
Well, how do we get people to, well, the first thing is we have to continue to be out there. I mean, what I learned the most from my time here in the Republican Party, and even going back to my 2022 race, is that we have abandoned the metropolitan areas. We have abandoned the population dense areas of the country, and for some reason we think they're just going to spontaneously and miraculously understand or realize they've been lied to. Some of them will, and some of them are. I mean, you saw a huge contingent of people, at least, who poured out on the social media that were in support of Donald Trump from Black communities and other minority, quote unquote, minority communities all across the country. But does that mean that they're willing to cast a vote for Donald Trump? Does that mean they're willing to vote Republican down ticket? Maybe not. Just because they support Donald Trump doesn't mean that they understand the fundamental. Just because they see Donald Trump as a rebellious figure to the failure of rebellious figure to the failures in policy that exists where they live, right? The political failures of Democrat Party doesn't mean that they're willing to give over to the Republican Party, or that they understand the fundamental of those failures, right? Like, I could see it, like, for example, let's say the whole defund the police movement. If I live in the heart of the north side of Minneapolis, I can tell on face value that the decrease in police presence has led to an increase in gun violence. I can see that. That doesn't mean I understand the fundamental of how policing works, or how the relationship between the funding, the federal funding, state funding, and policing works. Those are two different things. So we have to be there to teach those people those fundamentals. We can't expect people to just learn fundamentals when the entire education system is riddled with the ideology and people who broke the country in the first place. And I think there is another contingent of Republican Party activists, voters, delegates, party officers who, for some reason, believe that the people in Minneapolis, for example, are just going to wake up one day and understand. It's like, in what world? And it's such a far-fetched belief or hope that you got to start to ask yourself, are these people doing it on purpose? And my guess, I venture to guess they are. No, we didn't go down in it's one of two things, and I'll say this bluntly. Either we're not going down into Minneapolis because we're stupid, or because we're racist. Yeah, and that's the ugly dark side of this coin. And I don't mean to throw the race card out there. I know that's like a cardinal sin in the conservative movement to even talk about racism, because the Democrats have played it up so much, dishonestly, by the way. But there is an element to it, because you got to ask yourself. You go, well, if the goal is to win elections, in order to win elections, you have to change people's minds who think another way for whatever reason they think another way. Well, we have to go to the place where those people think another way, and we have to be the ones to tell them something different. And if we don't, for us to think they're gonna believe anything different is lunacy. So now we ask ourselves, what's stopping us from going there? I mean, really, what is it stopping us from going there? Are we going to say we don't know where to go? Are we going to say we don't know what to say? Are we going to say that we're in danger if we go there? Again, it goes back to that American citizenship. You get a permit to carry a gun. You carry a gun just like the apostles and the pilgrims and the people in the times of Christ. Peter carried a sword on him. He wasn't walking around, barefoot and empty-handed. He had his sandals and he had a sword on him, and he was willing to use that sword. Even one time, Jesus had to calm Peter down. He said, "Hold on." Peter went and he cut the ear off of the centurion guard, and Jesus goes, "Whoa, dude, slow down. You're not going where I'm going, Peter. Relax. I know you're willing to fight and die for me, but you're not going where I'm going." Right? But it's one of those examples in the Bible where, yes, an apostle did carry a weapon for a reason. So, it's dangerous out there. I mean, when you're evangelizing, when you're ministering the gospel, when you're spreading the value of American citizenship and constitutional rights and so on and so forth, it's going to be dangerous, especially when you let your country be taken over by communists and Marxists and Satanists. Absolutely. In order for us to spread the gospel now, we're going to have to go into some dark, decrepit, ugly, demonic places. This is kind of the value of that Catholic idea of exorcism. Yeah, we're going to have to exorcise some of these demons, So we have abandoned those places. And right now, as a movement, we have to ask ourselves why. And if we don't, I guarantee you what's going to happen here is they're going to spend the next 4 years, the next 2.5 years, painting Donald Trump as a racist, a fascist, a totalitarian. And they're going to use a bunch of racial incidents to support that narrative. There'll be some black man who gets shot, unarmed by a cop, a white cop, and that'll be on the headlines for 3 months straight. And all the black people who barely pay attention to politics at all, I mean, real policy, they'll keep getting this headline over and over and over again that the white cops got more and more racist under Donald Trump, and they'll stumble into a ballot box if they even actually go vote, which is another discussion. But in the narrative, they will be counted on the Democrat side in 2024, and Republicans will believe it. I mean, the biggest contradiction in the Republican movement or the conservative movement right now, the MAGA movement even, is all of these black people are dumb that live in the inner cities and they actually vote Democrat. We don't know that. If we can't count the votes, if we don't trust the count, we can't trust that they're actually voting Democrat even. See, but there's a part of us that wants to believe that narrative. And you can't help but notice there's a racial divide there, one that Donald Trump is trying to heal. He's trying his damnedest to heal, but I'm not sure everybody else is ready to do it, because it actually provides convenience for us. If we uphold the racial narrative, then everybody has an excuse as to why we don't get to fixing the stuff that we know needs fixing, right? Yeah. Like, if we can keep the racial tension high, then we don't have to talk about fractional reserve banking. And I'm just sitting here on the sidelines going, hey, if that's the game you guys want to play, proceed. But I'm going to continue to talk about the Fed, right? You guys keep playing this game. Oh, I don't want to go into Minneapolis because of the crime. Or the black folks in Minneapolis saying, well, I don't want to go to a Republican convention or event because the white folks are racist. Okay, well, keep going. Keep going. I guarantee you in about 15 seconds here, they're going to start making organic humans, and then you won't even have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about what, your sensibilities or your fears, or you're not going to have to worry too much because they're going to replace you.
Yeah, no, and they make it so convenient along racial lines. Absolutely. They want to have both camps work with these narratives to pit us against them. And I saw this play out when Ukraine and Russia were trading salvos with missiles. The biggest story was Nancy Mace's bathroom bill. Just divide you on cultural issues, get you talking about men being in women's spaces. Never mind the fact that Ukraine launched British-supplied missiles into Russia and Russia was preparing to retaliate. Don't focus on the big issues. Focus on the culture wars. Get people divided down in the streets, and so they don't pay attention to what you want to talk about, what we should be all talking about, these much larger issues. Royce, we're coming up on an hour. I want to respect your time. This question, I wasn't planning on asking it, but you talked about it
until you find it.
I mean, I can talk all day. I want to respect your time here.
I got some time right here. So
this is a fascinating conversation, and I just wish more people were ready for this conversation. And I think we'll get them there. And so that leads me into my question. I am not personally familiar, so I'm just asking as Todd. My audience is smart. They probably know already. You've gone through it. When you're knocking on doors and you're saying, I'm running for office, vote for me, is it because and this is related to getting to people to understand the fundamental and not just vote for a candidate in the states. Are you saying vote for Royce White? Or do door knockers typically explain what the issue is? Because I got to guess most Americans don't like what's happening with immigration. I'll just use immigration and foreign wars. I got to guess most people don't support this. Are we breaking this down when we knock on doors? Your campaign knocks on doors? Or is it just like, vote for Donald Trump. I see that you're a low propensity voter. I'm going to get you out to vote for Donald Trump. And then I go knock on the next door. Like, what does that process look like?
Well, the first thing to come clean about is I can't be sure what everybody's doing when they're knocking on doors and what they're saying, because
I understand. Yeah, fair.
Especially with a statewide race, right? I mean, there are people knocking on doors that I've never even met or talked to. What we tried to emphasize to everybody who we could that would maybe be branching to other networks of people that would door knock is to say, here are the issues, border debt forever wars. And those were the main theme. That was the theme of my campaign from the time of the convention. Our country's bankrupt. We got to close our border. We got to end these wars. And without doing so, you don't have a country. You don't have country. You don't have citizenship. You don't have citizenship. You don't have rights. You don't have rights. You don't have freedom. It's pretty basic, right? We try to get people to explain that, when they go door knocking, but who knows if that message got delivered. Part of the problem with door knocking in general is people don't even answer their doors. And, that's how kind of distrusting and disconnected our society has become. People don't want to answer the door for random strangers, whether they don't want to be, solicited or whatever the case may be, afraid for security and safety. All of it is valid. But people don't knock doors. And see, this is like, you saw this at the end of the campaign when we were going to try and go into Pennsylvania and ensure the victory in Pennsylvania. All of a sudden you had people popping up saying, well, why don't we go to these Pennsylvania University football games? I mean, first off, yes, very good idea. Secondly, we were already doing it in Minnesota and had been doing it for months. And I told everybody on the national level that this is what we were doing. Now, maybe somebody picked up on it and thought it'd be a good idea, or maybe it just happened organically. But these are the type of novel things that for some reason, whether it's because the party is a little bit older and ossified or because we have a crisis of controlled opposition, for some reason, we want to keep going to knock on each individual door as though we don't realize people don't want to answer. I mean, the people don't want to answer. What more do you, I mean, it's just it's a waste of time. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of resources. Why wouldn't you go to the bread and circus events where all the people are congregated in one place on a recurring, predictable basis? The only answer is you're either stupid or you've been paid to lose. And we have to get serious about this now. Like, there should be a Republican Party presence at every American professional sports event in the country all year long. So, and then this goes for everybody. RNC, Laura, love you, support you. Call me. I'm going to help you people now, okay? I'm going to be the tip of the spear. With all due respect, I'm going to help you all. Every bread and circus that this establishment has built to brainwash and distract the American people from what's important, mostly their policy and the people who represent them, those places we need to be at every single time. If it's a street team of people who are handing out literature, passing information, even if they're just smiling and waving with Republican merchandise and apparel, whatever it is, we need a presence in these places. Why? Most of these events happen in densely populated Democrat areas.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and being in front of people does go a long way. What I found out in my campaign was people may not understand the Republican Party. They may not be able to distinguish between Donald Trump and George Bush. They may still believe in some loose sense that Republican voters are racist, but they were willing to vote for me. And not only that, they were willing to hear me out. They were willing to listen. They were willing to listen when I said, hey, we got to stop getting involved in all these forever wars and sending our money to Ukraine. People were going, yeah, no, I might not even vote for you still, but I agree with you on that. And see, the longer you're there, the more you can piece together the common sense policy approach that we believe in. And before you do win people over. And it has happened in certain places all across the country, but not nearly enough. And so that's when I say abandon door knocking. We're not at a place in this country where people want a door knock. Go to the place where the people are. That's the point of politics. We know people love sports like religion. It's a problem for our society, one that we need to change. Hopefully we can. But until we do, it is what it is. And we need to go where the people are and preach the gospel and the value of American citizenship. And if we do that, we're going to start to make if every local house, state house, state senate, congressional district, statewide candidate focused on the professional sporting events where 10 to 15 to 20 to sometimes 70,000 people are coming to a politically neutral event, really, because you got to, like, even in Minnesota Vikings, for example, I can't tell you we were out there at the Vikings stadium. You'd have some people look and go, F Royce White. We got people holding the signs up to Royce White for Senate. People, oh, F Royce White. He's anti-Semite. And then you'd have people that walk and go, we love you, man. Like they were just excited about taking pictures. So it tells you that sporting events are somewhat politically neutral, which is a good thing. That means you're catching people in a spot where they're kind of on the fence just by natural osmosis. And that's exactly where we want to be. And we want Democrats to see that there are independents and Republicans that don't feel the same way about candidates and about policy and politics that they do. We want them to see it personally in person. We don't want it to be this echo chamber and zeitgeist just on social media or on television where I have to look at Fox or CNN to try and discern. No, I want you as a far left-leaning liberal to come to a Minnesota Vikings game and think Royce White is the worst candidate ever and see another person run up and hug me in excitement and take a picture. That's the real function of politics. And we don't do that. And we don't do it for a reason, because we really don't want to win, because winning would mean we actually get control of the thing, and then the responsibility is on us to deal with our own corruption. And
then they're going to see us because we're all neocons not doing a good job either, and then we get exposed for really what we are.
Yes, that's right.
I love it. Yeah, door knocking, and I don't mean to go after Dustin Gragey again. He's kind of our proxy for just everybody that's out there. But he was in your space. I know he was on X talking about, I knocked on so many doors. We set a record for door knocking. And then I get all these text messages. And I always wondered myself, like, does this actually work? And then I think about the money that was spent on campaigns. You see Kamala Harris's numbers. You see what Trump spent on TV ads. And like, if we only had $1 million more to pump out an ad, that would have changed minds. And I'm thinking, what a sad state of this country when someone knocking on your door, this television ad is what gets the job done. Like, get that campaign out in front of you. And if you didn't vote for Royce White, I would imagine it's because you listened to corporate media. You just read a headline. But man, I'm talking to you for an hour. We haven't spoken before, and I'm bought into the mission because you explain it so well. You're not some scary figure out there. You're a human being. I know you're a proud father, and you're speaking to issues that we all agree with. Like, once these Democrat or neocon voters are like, well, yeah, I actually agree we should close the border. I should agree we stop sending money overseas. I agree that the Fed is a major problem. Turns out I agree with Royce White on pretty much all these fundamental issues. But again, to your point, they don't want you out there in front of the people. They don't want this to be how the political system works. because it turns out most Americans, I think, would wake up pretty fast to what's going on.
Well, that's the biggest. I mean, and that's what the Dustin Grages are there to do, and that's what people have to understand as well. When you talk about Dustin Grage as an example, what I've discovered is that a lot of these Republican or conservative pundits and people who are social media, heavy on social media, influencers or whatever the case may be, what they're there to do is to prune their own political party of the populist candidates so that they can try and control the amount of people that we reach as candidates, right? Because running for an office and having a campaign that was as big as mine is naturally going to have some reach to it. Now they're trying to shrink that reach by pre-baking a narrative or having people. It's the whole thing about me for them wasn't that I was wrong on the issues, that I didn't have a proper vantage on the policy, or at least that's what they said early on. Now in that debate, Dustin Grage kind of took his mask off and said, no, Vladimir Putin is a war criminal. He shot first. Buddy, you're not a Ron Paul Republican, but their attack on me was never that I didn't have a good grasp of the policies or that I didn't understand what I was talking about. Their attack on me was, as a candidate, he's not electable, and they use this term electable to basically peel off any of the people who would actually say something that was important, that was meaningful, substantive. That's what they're doing. And you could look, we could say, for whatever reason, it tends to be the people who are rough around the edges, who got dirt under their fingernails, who have been through some turmoil in their life, you could say, some spiritual turmoil and growth, legal turmoil and growth. It tends to be these people who don't carry that same reserve about talking, about saying things just the way they need to be said. And Donald Trump's the best example. And that's why I said, Dustin, you can tell me you're a Donald Trump supporter if you want to, but when you say that I'm a bad candidate because of baggage, all you're saying is you really don't think Donald Trump was a good candidate. And he didn't. And that's why he supported Ron DeSantis. And Ron DeSantis is the same sort of guy. People got to understand this. He can play the conservative. I take a picture with my family and I vote conservative all he wants to. And I'm not saying he may not be a conservative. I'm not saying he's not a conservative. But what I'm saying is, where the conservative movement becomes the greatest form of controlled opposition is right there in the military-industrial complex. And where people don't understand that or don't want to confront that is exactly where they're going to get a knife in their back. And it's going to come from the very people who smile in your face. And hey, the scarier part is there is a group of there are American citizens out there that are willing to trade their freedom for security. There are Americans out there who feel just fine about, hey, I kind of got a blissful ignorance of the neocon thing. And as long as they tell me they love God and they love the country, I'll let them steal my tax money. I mean, it's just like, okay, well, proceed. But we're not going to stop running. See, that's the other thing is what we are going to do is we are going to draw a line in the sand for the Republican Party and create a beachhead of real America First policy, and that they can count on. That's why Dustin Grage gets so smug and just kind of resigns from the conversation and signs off, because he knows what I stand for. It's not even about the issues that we're discussing. What I really stand for is, I know who you people are. You may be able to fool the public. You're not fooling me. And because you're not fooling me, every time there's an election, you're going to have to face people like me in order to range find what American citizens actually understand to be important. And that's just the fight we're going to be in now.
Yep. And I think, to my point, I'm going to clarify what I said early on, where I was optimistic down the road. And you mentioned it later on here about the palpable difference between your first run for the House and then 2024 in the Senate. Just the vibe in the country. People weren't afraid to support Donald Trump anymore. Like, that just didn't happen in 16 and 20. It was still kind of taboo to say, I'm going to be MAGA and I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. People just don't care anymore. They're fed up with so much of the system.
Right.
I'm optimistic that that's going to work in this America First movement's direction against neocons as well. I guess I see them reading the writing on the wall. And you've got people like Grage that write for Town Hall. I'm not going to rock the boat. I got a good thing going for me. I'm just going to say things that are safe and play well to certain crowds. But what's your read on that as well? Do you share my optimism that this America First narrative is only going to get stronger, or do you see controlled opposition doubling down? They will double down, but to what extent will that be successful, do you think?
It's going to get stronger in that, the America First movement is so in order it's so in order with the natural human biology that it's
Right.
hard for it to do anything but grow. The rate at which it's going to grow is the question, and how much time we have for it to blossom into what it needs to in order to save the republic or keep the republic. Those are obviously the questions, right? I mean, I don't have a crystal ball. I mean, if we go to nuclear war with Russia next week, I guess the American First movement failed because it was too slow. It was too slow coming. But if we get 3 generations now of America First politics and dominance in the Republican Party and in this country, we may be able to salvage the republic, and that would be the ideal situation. My concern is that there's still some issues in here that we're unwilling to touch. The main one, and I'll just say it because I guess you're not supposed to be able to say it. The main one is Israel. Yeah, I mean that becomes the sort of safety net for the uniparty and the establishment to preserve the military-industrial complex and the idea of globalism. And it's not a comment about the Jews or anything. It's about the way that Israel is used politically, right? And those are two different things, right? It's different to say, I hate the Jews. That's ridiculous. I mean, and people don't really say that unless they're controlled opposition, and they are out there. They are out there kind of doing that I hate the Jews thing just for the theater and the effect, another form of distraction and political theater. But there is a very real and necessary conversation that should always be happening around foreign policy, given that Israel is the bedrock of our post-World War II foreign policy. And you can't even talk about it. And I had a good friend of mine who said it made a very important, said something very important. He goes, if Judaism, the religion, is so close to Israel's policy that I can't criticize the policy, then inevitably everybody will be anti-Semitic. And that is a very, very profound and real statement. And I'm not even making a comment about Israel's policy currently, more so that I'm talking about the general nature by which Americans, and even more importantly, conservatives and Republicans, talk about the policy in Israel, just as a general thing. We can't even discuss it. You have to support the policy of Israel, or you're considered an anti-Semite, or you're considered an enemy of Israel. And which is strange, because there are people in Israel, Jews in Israel, who are conservative, that have similar criticisms of Israel's policy and have huge criticisms of the way America has handled their Israel policy. And in some ways, you could say handcuffed and handicapped Israel. Like, for example, Obama was the one who signed this 10-year armament deal with Israel, where Israel was going to buy their arms from America, but they had to buy them exclusively from America. There are plenty of people there in Israel who don't want to have to rely on America solely to buy their arms. And I would agree with them. And again, if we go back to that fundamental American beliefs and values, our being the sole producer of another country's ability to manufacture the tools they need to defend their own freedom is not an American belief. It may be a good corporate or capitalistic belief, but it's not a core American belief. We don't want that. We don't want Israel to have to rely on us solely for their arms manufacturing. They can manufacture their own arms, and they can. But you can't even ask other questions like, if the Gaza Strip is and has been cut off on all sides, how do people suppose that they get weapons into Gaza in the first place? Yeah, I mean, do you mean to tell me that Israel, knowing that it's surrounded by all of its enemies, and our NATO allies there that dominate the Mediterranean Sea aren't watching the small little piece of ocean front or beach front, a sea front there that could potentially be used to smuggle in weapons to a terrorist organization by their definition, a terrorist organization. Do you mean to tell me that small piece of beachfront of Gaza is the hotbed of arms traffic to these radical Muslim terrorists there in the Gaza Strip? You got to be kidding me. It's like if you're gum dipped enough to believe that the fentanyl is coming through this country without the United States intelligence community knowing about it. You got to be kidding. And then you say that, and it's like, oh, it's Dustin Grady. Oh, it's tinfoil hat. Tinfoil hat? Mr. Ronald Reagan? Mr. Iran-Contra? Another name you can't say. And I'm not blaming Ronald Reagan for the Iran-Contra scandal. But what I am saying is somebody knew. Somebody knew, and it wasn't just Oliver North. Yeah, right. I mean, in order to trade guns and dope and money, a lot of people got to be in contact and in touch. Okay. Mm-hmm. And to think that the three-way trade of guns and dope and money still doesn't happen today between us and Mexico and wherever else these materials are coming for, it's just naivety. It's immature. It's childlike.
Willful
right?
Ignorance. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so again, and I go back I gave an American example to hopefully be able to prop up the example there in Israel. Israel's an even smaller border to protect. It's an even smaller beachfront to deal with. And you mean to tell me that they got enough guns into Gaza, enough guns, enough weapons, enough resources into Gaza to do what happened on October 7th and nobody knew about it? I mean, these people are master smugglers of biblical proportions. I've never seen smugglers this good. And see, they don't have these problems in China. And that's when you got to start to ask yourself, what's really going on here? Why can China protect its border? Why isn't China having a problem with illegal immigrants? And they're not having a problem. It's because they shoot first and they ask questions later. I dare any American citizen to book a flight and go on ahead to India or go on ahead to Kazakhstan or one of these bordering countries of China, and I dare you to try and go and fence hop or border jump there in China. I guarantee you're not making it back to the United States of America alive. I guarantee it. I can almost guarantee it. Absolutely. So again, something's wrong with Israel's policy as to how Gaza even got these weapons in the first place. And so you can't even ask that. If you ask that, if you say, why would an AIPAC support a radical Democrat like Hakeem Jeffries? And then you ask, well, why would the Republicans have any association or affiliation whatsoever with an AIPAC so long as they support a Hakeem Jeffries? And when you ask that question, it all becomes clear. And I'm not saying that we have a problem with Jews in America or internationally. What I'm saying is there are organizations, institutions like AIPAC that cover for the corruption that's going on in American politics, no matter who they are: Christians, Muslims, Democrats, Republicans, old, young, men, women. They're all hiding in these narratives, right? And this, again, even AIPAC is a post-World War II narrative. If we don't support AIPAC, then essentially we are creating the circumstance for another Adolf Hitler. I'm not supporting Hakeem Jeffries. I don't want $1 from any PAC that gives money to Hakeem Jeffries. I don't want the endorsement of any PAC or any group that finds any justification whatsoever to support a Hakeem Jeffries, because Hakeem Jeffries is about as corrupt a status quo shill as you could possibly find. Mm-hmm. And when the Republicans don't have the balls to do that or say that, they all show us who they are. So.
Yeah, and it doesn't even make sense, not to belabor the point in Israel, but I can be opposed to the war in Ukraine, and nobody has a problem with that. I don't want to send money to Ukraine. As soon as I say I don't want to send money to Israel, everyone gets up in arms and say, what is wrong with you? You got to defend Israel's right to exist. No, when I'm America first, I mean America first. That means no other money for any of these countries, but you can't say it. You can't say it.
How about we don't want to, and you can take it a couple layers deeper, because people will fleece you with, and again, this is taking the Lord's name in vain. You know, don't tell me we're fighting a holy war for Israel, but none of the people who are leading the war believe in God. And I don't mean that none of them believe in God, but I mean a good portion of these scientific, managerial, engineering, technocratic elites, these military industrial complex folks, some of them say they believe in God, but their actions are the complete opposite. And then some of them just openly reject God's existence. Some of them, they're in Israel. They don't tell me it's the Holy Land and you don't believe in anything holy. I mean, what kind of scam is that? I must be stupid. But the point is, you know, I like to take things a layer deeper, and you can usually find a deeper layer that really draws out the pus, right? And I mean the pus of contradiction and dishonesty. Why would we want to support Hakeem Jeffries? How does any Republican, how does any conservative or Republican justify supporting Hakeem Jeffries? And who was the other one? The lady there that's on AIPAC's landing page. I forget her name, but she's high up there too. You know, she was a radical pro LGBTQ type. But anyway, how do we support these people? I mean, as Republicans, like, let's say you're a Republican voter. Let's say you're a part of a Republican caucus or BPOU. Let's say you're a Republican delegate. Let's say you consider yourself a conservative. Let's even say you consider yourself a friend to Israel. Let's say you're Jewish, for example. Why are you supporting Hakeem Jeffries? And why is the same onus not on AIPAC to divest from the Hakeem Jeffries of the world as it would be for us to divest from radical Islam terrorism or you know, from Iran or from where? And I think we should. My number one and consistent message about our policy with Israel: get off of every side of the war. We don't want to fund all sides of the war. When you fund every side of a war, number one, it makes me think you're in it for the money. Number two, it becomes very hard to see who your enemies and who your friends are. Okay. So we should stop giving money to Iran, obviously. But if we're going to stop giving money to Iran, that would also mean we need to stop giving money to China. And see, everybody knows that, but they don't want to go there because the China gravy train is too big. So then don't tell me, all you free trade, cosmopolitan, sort of international Atlanticists, elites, don't tell me you love Israel and you're going to keep letting our supply chains be there in Beijing, in China, because then you're giving money to Iran. So really, you're just telling me a story. It's like supposed to keep me comfortable at night. It's like, what? You like, for another example, stop giving guns. We talk about this issue in Mexico. And there was a Democrat I was talking to the other day, and they brought this up to me, and I thought to myself, oof, that point right there hits you right in the gut. Does Mexico manufacture their own guns?
Are you asking me right now? I would I'm led to believe that no, based on the way you're asking that.
Well, I would say that they do have some arms manufacturing in Mexico. I mean, small arms, gun manufacturing. There are some gun manufacturers in Mexico, but I would venture to guess a lot of those manufacturing companies are American companies. Sure. And I would also argue that there are a lot of guns that make their way into Mexico that come from America. And we have heard Mexican politicians on the record say, hey, we know we have an issue with drugs coming your way and illegal immigrants coming your way, but we also have an issue in Mexico with guns coming our way that are making it hard to control these things. And see, if we can't be honest about both sides of that equation, then we're not really America first, right? I mean, we're doing some quasi-America first thing that I don't like. No, we do need to be making sure that our guns don't go into Mexico. Or we need to tell the Mexicans, hey, you better get a better Second Amendment down there, and you better start arming your own citizens with guns to make sure that they could fight off some of these threats of the cartels. And maybe Mexico goes to civil war between a sort of free people, rebel citizenry that are opposing the cartels. And maybe that's exactly what we should incentivize. We surely were willing to do it there in Ukraine, weren't we? We went right in there into Ukraine, eastern Ukraine, and we gave them weapons to spark a cultural ethnic rivalry there in the Donbass area. And there were Ukrainian, Russian gang fights that were going on since 2014. We were willing to do it there. We do it all over the world, but in Mexico, we're so scared of the Mexican citizens becoming, armed sort of American type citizens against the cartels. And we think that's on accident.
Yeah.
No, it's not an accident. We could have long told the Mexico's president, listen, first of all, if you don't get it under control, we're going to come and annex Mexico. All right, that's number one. If there's a military venture that we'll spend our time and resources and energy on, it's going to be right here on our border. And if you guys don't get this under control in Mexico, we're coming. We're coming down with the Apaches we're rolling in there, and Mexico is going to be the last. This is going to be the last chapter that Louisiana purchased. You feel what I'm saying? So, I say it jokingly somewhat, but serious, because we have to put the onus on Mexico, for example, to say, number one, we need to change the way that we deal with our citizens because it has effect on America. Not that, in some sense, I don't mean to bully them, but in some sense, again, we have to draw a clear line. And then once we draw a line, now we can start to operate from there. Mexico had, and this is a huge indictment of the Democrats' gun policies, their ideas about gun laws. Mexico has some of the strictest gun laws in the whole world, yet they have some of the greatest gun violence. Why? Because the only people with the guns are the cartels and the government.
Yep.
And the government's in on it in many ways. There's a lot of government, a lot of police that are in on the trade, but the citizens are just innocent bystanders. They have no way to defend themselves. They have no way to organize into small militias. And so the first thing we need to incentivize Mexico to do is, which will never happen now because they just elected a communist, cautionary tale for America. But what we should have done was we should have incentivized Mexico to turn their citizenry and their populace into a more America Second Amendment arm-bearing populace, and then the cartels would have had a natural rebuff, a natural sort of challenge. And that's what we should have done all around the world. The number one hallmark that the post-World War II Democrat liberal order was a lie is, if we wanted to bring freedom and democracy all around the world, the first thing we would have given the people of those countries was a fundamental sense of the Second Amendment. And that way in Korea and Vietnam and in the Kashmir, wherever we are, in Europe and in the Eastern Bloc, wherever we are, wherever we're saying we're defending our national interests by holding these military outposts, if we would have given those people the Second Amendment and we would have given them arms, let's sell them guns. I'm fine with selling them guns. Let them manufacture their own guns, though, hopefully in the long term. But let's get every citizen in Ukraine should have a weapon. Every citizen there in Taiwan should have a weapon. Every citizen there in Korea should have a weapon. And that is the first line of defense against economic and military imperialism. We didn't do that. We like those people depending on us. We like Mexico depending on us. And as so is the case, we're going bankrupt. We're going bankrupt. Hell in a handbasket. And, if somebody's out there and they want to contest that analysis, by all means, be a Dustin Gragey type. Have the courage. Stand up. We'll schedule the X space, and you can tell me how my analysis is off. But so far as I see it, we are going to suffer the same death by 1,000 cuts as the Roman Empire if we keep this up.
100%. Open border situation. It feels trite to say this, and I feel like it shouldn't have to be said anymore, but you keep repeating it. I'll keep repeating it on my platforms. There is no good reason for an open border, just to bookend that conversation. If it's a deal with the cartel, if it's a deal with the Mexican government, getting drugs smuggled up here, I absolutely believe your analysis that drugs or guns are going back in the other direction. And you don't have to go back that far back in time to look at what Obama did with Eric Holder, sending guns down there and having them marked to see where they end up. They were exploring. They wanted to find out actually what happens to the guns that we allow to go across the border in the first place. No one wants to talk about that issue. But I love your analysis. I had never thought about it before, but you're so spot on. And when I say I don't like saying the same thing over again, you only have to look at what every country has done that took away weapons from its citizens. Every communist nation first disarmed the population and then had complete control over the population, which often led to outright genocide. So I love your point talking about arming them and bringing the Second Amendment around the world. If we actually truly believed in individual freedom and limited government, every government around the world should have been afraid of its citizenry, and the exact opposite happened. We supplied governments with power and military control over an unarmed population that was devastated by the wars that we unleashed on them.
Right. No, I mean, we yeah, we didn't want these nations to be self-determining. It's a lie. And so
Nope.
to all my boomers out there who can't deal with it, and the reason I bring that up specifically is to tie back to what I was saying about the World War II doctrines. The World War II doctrines where we're going to make all these people self-determining. No, we're not. We're making them dependent. And therein lies a scam. We say we want them self-determining as like a, as like a cultural sentiment. It's just like a fluff. It's a propaganda, really, is what it becomes. We don't want them self-determining. We want them dependent on America for all forms of common life in that part of the world. And we can't afford it anymore. That's the beating heart of the crisis that we face now as a nation. We can't afford to be to subsidize the whole world. We can't subsidize the whole world. The American taxpayer cannot subsidize the entire world. And if you get one of these neocons, the first one who says Vladimir Putin's a war criminal, they're a neocon. That's the litmus test. When you get these candidates coming in 2026, they're coming. The midterms they've already begun. And about 12 months out, you'll start seeing these candidates pop up. All you got to do is ask them one question. Is Vladimir Putin a war criminal? Like I asked Dustin Gragey, like Ron DeSantis already said. Now, Ron could say he misspoke or he's since had, has a different opinion or whatever. I mean, all these Upper East Coast Yale Ivy League guys think the same way. I mean, that's the bastion, that's the railhead of this globalist Atlanticist propaganda and worldview. These people think the same way, but ask him, do you think he's a war criminal? Do you think an American citizen who pulls a gun and points it at a cop, should be safe? Do you think that a cop should have to wait for a citizen to pull a gun, point it at them, and fire in order to defend himself? Do you think another citizen should have to do that? These are basic American values that you can expand to the global scale and ask the same questions about geopolitical conflicts, and you come up with very, very simple answers, not complex. We need to demilitarize Eastern Europe. We need to demilitarize Ukraine, NATO, and we need to get off of Russia's border. They've earned that right. And if you want to take it all the way down to a Darwinian sense, let's go there, because some of these people don't believe in God. So they have no real righteous fabric to their morals and ethics. And they're more the Darwinian types, right? Okay, well, let's go all the way down to the Darwinian argument. Russia's earned the right to have some space on their border. They've earned the right through the leadership of their country and what their culture has become. They've earned the right through their scientific ingenuity. They've earned the right through their current political leadership to have the balls to say, give us some space. Now, everybody may not say that, and every country and their leaders have a right to handle geopolitical negotiations the way that they want to. But Russia has said clearly, give us some space. We don't like you being this close up to our border. We find it threatening, and they've earned the right through scientific ingenuity and through the stewardship of their cultural identity and their national identity. So we need to respect that. And if we want to keep again, the ICBMs are already flying. People don't get it. It's going down. This thing is happening right now, and cooler heads may prevail. Usually they do, but we're certainly flirting with the upper limit, the upper threshold of causing World War III. So. You boomers, and again, I say the boomers, I'm not picking on you, but there are a lot of, if you go to the Republican Party in Minnesota, a lot of boomers in the party that are the delegates. They're going to decide whether I get endorsed in 2026. They're going to decide who the candidates are coming out of the Republican Party from the congressional districts to the statewide races, governor's race, all the way down to local state house and state senate. All the way down to, whatever else. And they got to get right about that. And I have no problem going into a room and telling them, you people have lost your minds. You people are not seeing this right. And a lot of them don't like me for that. A lot of them look at me and they go, this guy's arrogant, he's pompous, he's kind of an asshole. I'll be that guy. I'm fine with that. But one thing we're going to do, if I'm in the room, is we're going to talk about things the way that they really are, not the way we want them to be or the way we wish they were, how they really are. You can't point a gun at somebody and expect them to wait for you to shoot in order for them to start shooting back and defend themselves. That's not an American ideal. If you think like that, you go caucus with the communists. Go over there and caucus with, with Kamala. Go caucus with Amy Klobuchar. And some of you probably voted for him, and rightfully so. Go caucus with Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley believes that. And that's how you can – Nikki Haley can wrap herself in the flag all she wants. She could give you the southern drawl of North Carolina and act like she's this Bible Belt conservative or whatever the case may be. The reality is she has a crisis of American fundamental ideas and values. She thinks that somebody should have to wait to engage if they have a gun pulled and pointed at them. That's not American, Nikki. That's not American, Ron. You got, and I'm not saying you're not Americans. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is you can't lead because you don't understand the fundamentals.
And it gets people that they never met, don't care about, gets them needlessly killed, whether it's American men and women in uniform, whether it's these poor Ukrainian and Russian civilians overseas now. They don't care about all the death and casualty and carnage that they cause. Royce, I got one more question for you. This is a personal issue for me. I apologize. I'm curious your thoughts on the campaign, and then I'll let you go here. I appreciate you coming up on 2 hours with us here. How strong in Minnesota? I'll tell my story first, and I'll ask you if you noticed this in your campaign. So earlier this year, I went to, I think it was called the Minnesota Family Council, and I just read the room. It was a bunch of people that pat themselves on the back for going to church every Sunday, primarying for Nikki Haley. They hated Donald Trump, and it's a Minnesota Family Council was speaking on the issue of abortion. They made abortion the number one issue. They said, we're going to fund delegates. We're going to find the right candidates in these competitive House races, and we're going to save, turn the narrative on abortion in Minnesota. And in my head, I'm already sitting there. I'm thinking there are a lot. I have thoughts on abortion. I don't think that's the number one issue in Minnesota politics right now. You guys could have pointed out a Tim Walz's COVID tyranny. You could have pointed out my property taxes just went up 14% this year. You guys could focus on the economy. You could focus on giving illegals driver's licenses and benefits that I am not entitled to as an American citizen. People struggling to pay their mortgages as American citizens. But they wanted to make abortion the issue. And it seemed to me, and I don't know how much sway they have. I guess that's why I'm asking you, how much did that topic come up in your campaign, or was that a thing for you? To me, it just felt all wrong. It was people fundraising, knowing they're going to likely lose too, but it gets the right people to donate money to them. I guess, what is your take on the issue of abortion and not your personal issues? I guess I have my personal issues on what ought to be done. Obviously, it is heinous what Tim Walz has allowed vis-a-vis abortion, but was that a powerful lobby that you were up against, or what was the presence of the abortion?
So is the Minnesota Family Council. So which one is the one that Michelle Fischbach's husband runs? Is that the MCCL? Is that what that is? The Minnesota Christians for Life, MCL?
That sounds right to me.
Okay, so Minnesota Family Council is different, but effectively the same sort of group. They're kind of a Christian conservative lobby.
Yeah.
That's what they are?
Christian conservative, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, here's the thing, and I say this with as much grace as I can possibly muster. The greatest crisis in this country is the crisis of Christianity. Yeah, and I don't mean the atheists. I don't mean the leftists and the communists. I mean the Christian community itself. Yeah, because see, we still got allegedly, could be that this is an inflated number, but allegedly we still have some 30 million Christians that decided to sit out of the most important election in American history. But then they'll tune into Fox News and they'll listen to the cultural wedge issues of how Christian values are being strategically carved out of this country's fabric. And I just ask myself, what kind of racket is that? I mean, it is the greatest racket of all time, to wrap yourself in the cloth of Christ and then watch as Satanists take your country. And it's a problem in the Christian community nationwide. But right here in Minnesota, it's a little more, I'd say, it's a little more manipulative than that. It's a little more sneaky. Here in Minnesota, I find that the Christian community, especially some of these Christian lobbies, have been placed there to do exactly what we've been talking about, to play the controlled opposition. I don't think that's the problem broadly. I think broadly there's a cultural sentiment that says the spiritual is more important than the political, that the spiritual transcends the political. Therefore, sometimes the political is neither here nor there. It's not even an important issue. We don't place any value on it or put any time or energy into it. I think that's a misread of the gospel. I think when Paul talks about citizenship, Roman citizenship in the Bible, he's making a clear distinction about the value of citizenship itself. And the number one argument that Christians have to be involved in the political process is we've been given a mandate to spread the gospel. Any government policy that impedes the ability to spread the gospel has now become an act of war against Christians, essentially. And Christians should be willing to rebuke, refute, stand, fight, and if need be, die in order for the right to spread the gospel. And that's been impeded against Christians all across America. But in Minnesota, it's like Michelle Fishbach's group, for example, the MCL. I think it's the MCL, Minnesota Christians for Life. And there was a survey that went around the entire Christian community that's connected to that organization. And we went through this whole back and forth where they said the questionnaire, the survey was due at this day or on this day, and then they put a round of them out, and then there were all these Christian churches or Christian institutions in the state that wouldn't have my literature there in the primary because this survey wasn't in. And Michelle Fishbach faced a primary up there in her district, and there was a huge tussle in her convention, right? She was endorsed by Donald Trump, and she still couldn't get out of her convention with an endorsement. Mm-hmm. I mean, that is a telltale sign that there's trouble in paradise up there in her district. I mean, at least on the party insider front, which are the people who are probably paying the closest attention to who Michelle Fishbach really is. I mean, your average voter in the congressional district primary probably is not as well versed with the inner workings of what's going on there, but the insider people, the delegates who voted in that congressional district race, they're a good indicator of what's going on there. And so when Steve Boyd decided to run against Michelle, and they couldn't get her out of that convention with a majority for endorsement, that sent shockwaves throughout the entire Minnesota political community. Mm-hmm. And Steve Boyd was one of the more, he was America First, more conservative Christian type platform and message. And I think some of it kind of spilled over onto me, because Steve Boyd and I align so much on the issues, when it comes to the policy. I think that Michelle and probably some other people saw me as, being against Michelle. Now, I don't even know Michelle. And before this campaign, I didn't know Steve. I like Steve. I met him a couple of times. We stumped together. And that wasn't against Michelle because, again, I don't know Michelle. I just know here's a guy who I like, who's saying it like it is. I agree with where he's at on the issues. And that's it. And he doesn't have any establishment people behind him. And that's a good litmus test for who I want to be associated with. So, and I say that to say this, even Michelle Fishbach, who has one of the more conservative records in the House, and her husband is in charge of a Christian lobby, Minnesota Christians for Life, I believe. Even that can be weaponized. Even that can be weaponized. And again, there's a reason why you saw me underperform Donald Trump in the outstate in those 4 congressional districts that belong to the 4 Republican congressmen members. Mm-hmm. And when the Star Tribune asked all 4 of them if they would support me and endorse me against Klobuchar, their answer was, "We're worried about our own races." And then to make matters even worse, you get the Minnesota Farmers Bureau, who endorses Amy Klobuchar, as well as the 4 Congress members. Now you got to ask yourself, in what world does the Minnesota Farmers Bureau believe that Amy Klobuchar is anything other than the globalist shill that we all know her to be? In what world does a senator who's selling our rear end to China hand over fist and to BlackRock and all these other multinational corporations, in what world does a Minnesota Farmers Bureau think that Amy Klobuchar is actually defending the sustainability or the viability of our American farmers? It's everything to the contrary. So the Farmers Bureaus was selling their own people out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's and just like the unions. Yeah, some of these unions selling the workers out. Even the police union. The police union endorsing Amy Klobuchar. Come on, Amy Klobuchar supports Ilhan Omar, Governor Walz, Keith Ellison. They're all one team of people. They were defund the police. It doesn't matter what they said on the record. We know who they are. We know where they fell on that issue. It was clear as day. And so the police union is endorsing Klobuchar because what? She is a friend to law enforcement. You can't be pro open border and a friend to law enforcement. The two things don't go together. So I mean, it's just like we could go through it over and over and circle the wagons, but the issue is people like me need to keep running just to be able to gauge who's who. Like we're a rangefinder, we're a temperature test for the political waters.
Absolutely, yeah. Smoke them out, understand who you need to primary, and encourage more people. Okay, I listen to Royce White. I see it what it is now. I want to get involved, and hopefully you spark a movement just in Minnesota. Like, I like Royce White. I want to do what he's doing too. And man, it just blows my mind. I'm just going to go back to my comment too. But everything you said, my eyes are getting opened. I follow it. I don't follow it that closely, and then I realize most people don't follow it at all. But when you point out how Klobuchar, of all people, is getting endorsed by these unions, and she will do the exact opposite of what these unions would benefit from. Yeah, I'll support Klobuchar and then endorse these Republican congressmen. Like, you can't circle that square. So just, again, you expose some corruption there. Just keep exposing them for what they're doing. Yeah, I'm sitting in this Minnesota Family Council meeting, and they're going on about how bad Donald Trump is. And I'm thinking to myself, if let's say abortion is your number one issue, life is your number one issue, Donald Trump got Roe overturned, and here these people are saying, I don't like Donald Trump. So I'm trying to figure this out. Like, what grift are you guys buying into? And I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump because he's mean. And then maybe Kamala Harris wins and she codifies Roe nationwide. So I'm just trying to figure out, like, what do you people actually believe in? And I don't say this condescendingly. I know you've been clear multiple times. We're not trying to denigrate or condescend. I just have a lot of questions. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to me. And I just wish people, I think they're just misinformed. They're good people. Most of my friends didn't vote for Donald Trump. They're good people. They focus on work. They focus on family. They're just misinformed. And I just appreciate your message, your campaign, trying to get the word out, trying to inform and wake people up to how it actually operates.
Yeah, no, that's a strange thing that Republicans would not vote for Donald Trump. And that's why when you go all the way back to what you asked me in the beginning about does the movement grow and does it continue on and do I feel optimistic about the future? I don't know how many people voted for Donald Trump because they understand why he was a good choice, or they voted against Kamala Harris and just how bad and failed the Democrats have shown themselves to be. I guess time will tell. But I do know one thing. As far as Minnesota goes, we will give Minnesotans between now and 2026 the full gamut of information they need to have an informed decision about real substantive policy-based issues. And the number one criticism I got sometimes from Democrats was, you never talk about policy. I want to hear the specific policies. This is all policy. What we're talking about is policy. I mean, it's more the ideology that informs a policy, but this is the policy that we're talking about. And if it happens that we go on that tour across the state of Minnesota and we talk to all of these voters, and they still come out in 2026 having voted for Tina Smith and Governor Tim Walz, or let's say some other rhino neocon in the primary, you get the government you deserve. And by God, we all will.
So true. And Royce, I hope to see you in 2026, if it's running for senator, if it's in 28. In Minnesota, Tim Walz can't run again. Is that correct? You get 2 terms, or can he run again?
No, I think he can.
Okay. Well,
I think he's running in 20. He's running in 20. He's running in 26.
Oh, that's right. So you've got some options in 2026 if you decide to put your name on paper again. And I hope you do. Minnesota would be so much better for it if you were there. I said this an hour ago. I didn't want to take too much of your time. We are running up on 2 hours of time, though, Royce.
Yeah.
I just want to say I really appreciate you coming on. This was an enlightening conversation for me. I hope our audience can understand what we are up against, and you laid out the case so well. Here's just me talking about this doesn't make sense to me. This is what I see, and you're able to take it to such a deeper level and explain it so well. So I, I hope that you are able to continue to get out there. I hope you want to get back out there and keep changing minds. But I'm going to give you the last word if you've got any other comments. And how can people find you, Royce? Like, I know you do your own podcast. Where can people find you to just follow you as well?
Yeah, I mean, you can go to my X. We usually run the podcast on my X. Monday, Wednesday, Friday is the normal schedule. Saturday mornings, I'm on Real America's Voice at 9 a.m. Eastern for the Royce White Show. So that'll be tomorrow morning. Again, that's 9 a.m. Eastern. I'm planning on going to a daily show on Real America's Voice. We're trying to work out that schedule now. I might end up doing a Sunday edition, a call-in special edition of the Please Call Me Crazy podcast that's on YouTube. It's on Rumble as well. We got to catch up about 10 episodes on the Rumble channel from the later stages of the campaign. So you can find the podcast on Rumble as well. War Room, Steve Bannon's War Room, also runs the podcast on their Rumble channel as well as their Getter account. And yeah, I mean, the thing here is I hope that we get a Never Nikki Haley movement going. I hope there's as strong of a Never Nikki Haley movement as there was a Never Trump movement. I don't think there will be, and that's a huge indictment of the country and of the Republican Party. But 2026 is fast approaching, and we're going. I mean, it's not a matter of if, it's what, and of what, of who. But either way, the net result has to be the same. The net result is there has to be a political shift in the fundamental understanding of Minnesota voters, both Democrat, Republican, and even in the middle, independent, indifferent. So there has to be an educational process that happens. That's what we're committed to over the next 24 months with my campaign. And if the end result should be an electoral victory, then praise be to God. But the point is that somewhere we have to start educating people again, and who better to do it than somebody who's running for office? That's what politicians should be doing. We should be educating our constituents and citizens on the most important issues. So that's what I'm going to be focused on the next 24 months. If there's a Republican party, BPOU, party officer, somebody out there that wants to organize an event in their respective place, area of the state, reach out to the campaign, info@roycewhite.us. You can visit our website, make sure that you reach out. And we want to schedule a time to come to every county, every BPOU in the entire state of Minnesota over the next 24 months, because I guarantee you the Nikki Haley's and the Ron DeSantis's and all the others who, no matter what they say, oppose Donald Trump and the win that we just, enjoyed, they're regrouping. They're going to be recoalesced here shortly. It's already begun. And if we're not careful, we will lose the progress that we just made. And there's no difference between a neocon and a communist. And I'll say this to end. This is a little bit more of a spiritual matter, but the reason why a neocon is essentially a communist is because communism's real goal is to reduce the human existence down to price. And when you reduce the human existence down to price, every single living human being becomes inventory. And in communist nations, you see, they talk about utilitarianism and this sort of government structure that sort of sees people on an equal footing, but they're only equal in that they are all inventory of whatever the ideological goal is of those communist leaders and that communist government regime. And oftentimes it leans into tyranny, and oftentimes you end up seeing genocide. That's the evidence of the communist regimes that have been the most successful in recent history. But the neocon thing, the military-industrial complex thing, is the same thing, same, but different. And essentially, we see every American taxpayer, every American citizen, and all the citizens around the world as a justification for military armament and the increase of military footprint and interest. That is communism. I mean, you can try and slice it any way you want to, but the reality of the situation is when you get down to the core fundamental, the principle, the military industrial complex is based on inventory, and it turns its benefactors and the people it claims to defend into inventory as well. Our troops, our young men and women who serve as veterans, they got to go and fight these wars. These missile drone operators who have the highest suicide rate of any other position in the military, or the people out there around the country that have to pay in, that subsidize the thing. They can't put together $500 cash in a crisis, but we're going to send $1 trillion to the Ukraine. I mean, we can't afford it on so many levels. And in the party, in the Minnesota Republican Party, all across the country, this is the wave that we must continue to fight, and that's what my goal is, and that's why I'm here.
Well, appreciate it, Royce. Yeah, thank you for your courage. Someone had to step up. You did. You are able to put this message out there in the way that people need to hear, and so I am excited for the next 2 years. If we can help out over here, let us know. Whatever it takes, we need as many people as possible to get your name out there and get people to understand. And I love how you put it, just the fundamental. It's more than just name recognition. It's more than just Donald Trump anti-com. It's about you need to understand the issues as an American. Yeah, you might vote for Donald Trump, but in 4 years, what happens if you don't understand the core issues?
Right.
So I appreciate your time here. We just went over 2 hours.
Thank you, brother.
Royce,
Godspeed to you, man. Let's do it again sometime. I appreciate the time.
Have a great day.